Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Barron. Thanks for joining us for today's case study. So I am here with Nishant Mehta of MehtaCognition, which, by the way, I think is one of the greatest organizational names in independent schools. I've loved it from the moment I heard it. And I'm really thrilled to have Nishant with us today. He wrote a piece. Gosh, Nishant, when did you write that? Was it a couple months ago?
Yeah, this was about, I think, back in maybe February or so.
Okay. Talking about how a strategy is not a plan, and we're going to get into all of that. And I just love the way he's thinking about this. But first, Nishant Mehta from MehtaCognition, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Peter. Delighted to be here. Definitely been following your work and love, what you're doing for our schools. So important and just absolutely needed. So happy to help spread the word in any way, that I can and we can. As Peter said, MehtaCognition is a management consultancy, primarily works with independent schools, both in the United States and abroad. We do a lot of coaching. We do consulting of all kinds, from financial sustainability, enrollment strategy, diversity, equity, inclusion, to whole-scale strategic planning, and then coaching boards, leadership teams, heads of schools, senior admin. To really take, Peter, what I would say the way we think about it is that we really mirror the administrative team on the school side. And so what you're not getting is an isolated or a siloed perspective. The way that MehtaCognition really, in terms of our consultancy, as we think about it, is really to, again, always look at it holistically and to be able to provide the person at the top the leadership counsel and coaching that they can really look at it again across the institution as opposed to just one particular aspect of the organization.
Yeah. And you also are doing a lot of writing out in the space. And it's been very helpful for me as somebody who's, also trying to put a lot of helpful content out there and seeing the work that you're doing. And you, like we said earlier, I guess it was in February, you wrote this. It was a series of blog posts, right? And one of them was about confusing strategic planning with strategy. And strategy is not a plan. Can you break that down for me? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, just a little bit of background, because you said a series, I started to get really grumpy about just simply strategic plans, that we were seeing out there. And especially because of the work that we do, we work with a lot of schools, of course, that have strategy or strategic plans. And really, where I started to get grumpy is the word that I use, is because there was just that exactly what you said, Peter, is the conflation of strategy, which was getting passed off as, or really what even gets passed off as strategy. And, what we found again and again is that there is just a misconception, a misunderstanding of what is strategy. And of course, too many people have written about that plan is not a strategy is not a plan, all that stuff. But really what we found is that even just the definition of what is strategy is not well understood in our industry. And I felt that I needed to write about it, and one post was not going to be enough.
Right. So talk about that. What in your mind, because I love how you talk about mission, vision, strategy, plan. Yeah. When you think about strategy and you offer a definition, but how would you describe it to folks who are watching or listening?
Yeah, so strategy, there are a number of things, right? But a strategy, there are a few things that I think are critical when we think about what's core. One, strategy at its core is about an organization's competitive advantage. You have to know what differentiates you from everyone else in the market. And so if your strategy is something that you're putting out there, you are essentially revealing your competitive advantage, which by definition automatically is no longer really going to be that specific, right? Where I started that post, Peter, that you're referencing, I asked folks to think about, where did Apple put its plans for the iPhone before 2007 when it was actually revealed, right? Where does Gucci or Louis Vuitton or any of them, go out there and put their strategy on their websites, right? And yet our schools do that all the time, right? So when we think about competitive advantage, what makes one school competitive in the marketplace over the rest of the competition, over its peers. At its core, strategy, if it's not truly understanding and doubling down or reinforcing your competitive advantage, it's not strategy, right?
Oh
The
no, keep
second
going,
piece,
please.
the second piece, Peter, that I would say I think that's going to be really important beyond competitive advantage is that strategy is really about an integrated set of choices, right? What that means is that as soon as we say integrated set of choices, right? One, the word choice implies that if you're choosing something, you are also not choosing something else. So the key to doing strategic thinking and strategic work is that you have to be willing to say no. And in fact, you have to say no. If you're not clear about what you're saying no to, you don't have strategy because you can't be strategic. If you're choosing everything, right, then you're not actually making a choice. You're not really prioritizing anything. So one, are you clear about what's your competitive advantage? And two, are you actually saying no to things? And not just it's an easy no, it has to be a hard no, right? It has to be a hard choice that you're just like, oh man, I really wish we could do this. And yet we're not going to do it because these other things are really going to help us reinforce who we are and what we serve really, really well, right? So those are at least two that I would offer at a beginning place that schools and our industry has to be really clear about when thinking about strategy.
I had Tom Olverson on earlier episode of this case study series, and he wrote the book Leading Through Strategy. But in the episode, and in the book too, he talks a couple of things I think really builds off nicely what you just laid out. One is that, strategic plans typically are political documents. They're appeasing lots of different constituent groups, and at the end of the day, are pretty much just like this is his take. That they're just what's the best way to phrase this? It's just normal the way you do business, right? Like we're going to do all these things, but you probably would maybe do those things anyway had you not, put them into a strategic plan. And what he talks about is that a strategy needs to have risk. In absence of risk, are you doing the work that you need to do to push the organization forward? Like, does that fold into what you were just talking about, do you think?
That's a really interesting, couple of things, I guess. One is, so much of, I think, what we see as strategic plans out there, aligning with a little bit of what Tom said, right? Which is, how is it not just what schools should be doing? Right. And so when you think about when you look at a school strategic plan and you're like, isn't that just simply what a school should do anyway? Right. That right there is right away your litmus test of, is this actual strategy or are we just simply restating, what we would be doing regardless of whatever we end up calling it? Right. I think the world that it's a political document, what you mentioned, I think so much of it, I think we look at really what we produce as a marketing plan as opposed to a strategic plan, right? And a marketing plan or some kind of marketing can be an output of your strategy, right? So you can have something public. It's not that, every aspect of your strategy should be private, but your strategy should remain private because it is your competitive advantage. You do not make that public, right? As soon as you make it public, now it's a marketing plan, a marketing tool. So what is the risk, right? And the way, to Tom's point about risk, what I typically tend to advise schools is that really, there are three things or so, if you will, that your strategy should be constantly navigating, right? The whole strategy by itself cannot be transformational, right? Your strategy should not be all about transformation because you don't have the appetite or the resources to really make everything about your future something that is about transforming or transformative work, right? But you should have some part of your strategy that is about transformation, right? So the way we think about it, and the three things that I recommend is that some part of your strategy should be really about reinforcement, right? This is what we do really well. We know that this is competitive. It's better than anyone else. Let's make sure that we continue to resource and reinforce that so that we keep our competitive advantage. some other part of your strategy, you may realize, you know what, this is actually misaligned, right? This is what we say out there that we do, but this is not as really good. It's not done really well. We need to make some iteration. We need to make some tweaks in order to be able to realign it. So the proof is there, but we don't have all of it there yet in order to be fully aligned with what we say we do. So you got to make some tweaks. You got to iterate. And then the third part is, where do you take risk, right? Here is an opportunity for us to be able to try some things. What are the risks, or what are the transformations that we would like to see? And so you really want to think about your strategy in those three buckets: is what are the tweaks, what are the transformations, and what are the things that you're going to resource and reinforce, because that already is something you do superbly, in the marketplace.
Well, let's go up one level higher. Like, so where does vision come into all of this?
Yeah, vision is, really kind of the way that I talk about is that it's your destination, right? So it's that sense of, if mission is your purpose, right? Mission is why you exist. That's your purpose. Vision is the destination. Strategy is the roadmap, right? And I think that's also part of where I think we have to be super clear. Like, when we use these terms, I think we need to be really careful about making sure that we have calibrated and defined what these terms mean, so that if people think that they're working with you to get strategy and what you deliver is vision, there is going to be some dissonance. Wait a minute, I thought we were getting the roadmap, but what you really delivered is the philosophy or the destination, right?
Yeah. Right.
Or really what would be the worst outcome is all we did is reinforce the purpose statement.
Right.
Right, of what the school should already be going anyway. So mission is your purpose, vision is your destination, strategy is the roadmap. And, what we say is that, look, your mission is inflexible, right? That's your non-negotiable, right? Your purpose for being should not change dramatically, right? Your vision, to a large extent, should not change dramatically either once you really set what the aspiration is that you're working towards. Your roadmap, to a large extent, should be iterative and should be flexible. And that's the other piece that I find that's just such a misconception about strategy and strategic plans. We immediately set a 5-year goal. This is our 5-year roadmap. Well, let's look at it, right? Because one, that's arbitrary to begin with, right? To a certain extent, you also think about the roadmap. Some things on that roadmap you could accomplish in 12 to 18 months. Some things you could, do in 3 years, and some things may actually take 5 years. So why are we setting one timeline for everything as opposed to looking at everything on that roadmap with its own time?
Yeah. Do you ever look at the work of like EOS? Are you familiar with it? Entrepreneurial Operating System. Yeah. So it's a lot of what you're talking about. And one of the things I really appreciate about the methodology is that it says, okay, set your vision. What is that thing? What do you want to be, right? Where do you want to go? And then it says, look, create a 3-year plan, and then a 3-year strategy and a 1-year strategy, and then back out like the plan into quarterly goals, right? But what's brilliant about it is it says at the end of that 1-year strategy, that 3-year strategy that you had created, throw it out, because largely it's changed and you've got to reimagine that 3-year strategy. And it speaks to that iterative mindset that you were talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece, Peter, that, I think we have all moved away from, or to a large extent, I see that, people are no longer saying, this is your 2023 to 2028 or something like that. And yet, I think, what we have not built is the leadership and the strategic muscle in our institutions to know how to iterate, right? How to really use data to be able to look back on, are you actually succeeding? Are you progressing? How do you know where you're progressing, why you're not, if you're not progressing at all, right? Like, again, we just haven't necessarily built some of that muscle in our institutions.
I feel like, though, it's that we're starting to, right? Like, I see Cirrus starting to really gain a lot of momentum in the space. You're seeing way more institutional research folks popping up in schools than you did just a couple of years ago. So, I don't know. I'm encouraged by that. How about you?
Yeah, I'm definitely encouraged by it. I think, the question, that to me is still an outlier. And again, I just don't have a clear answer on this. So it really is an open-ended question. But I will say, yes, I'm encouraged. And I think we are going to need to continue to find data and data folks from outside the industry, not from within, because the training just isn't available and it's not present in terms of really the rigor and the depth of the data that we need. Even understanding the difference between information and data, understanding that not all data is equal, what is the relevance of the data, right? So to give you an example, because we, of course, encounter a lot of data, as we do our work. And what we find again and again is that, one, there is no coherence to a lot of the data in our institutions because there are too many databases, but no one who's actually owning the data, right? And the second and the more important thing about this, Peter, which I think we need to level up a little bit as well across the board for all of us, is how to make meaning, how to tell a story from the data. So you can bring all kinds of research and data folks inside the organization or working with you, but if they don't know what questions to ask, what story to tell, how to tell the story, and if we can go deep, then it's not going to help, right? It's not going to help you build a good strategy.
Yeah. In just the, like you said it, like the data's living in multiple databases often, and different data structures, and they're not necessarily talking to each other. So like pulling it together in a sensible sense, in a way that makes sense, that's hard. It's really difficult, really, really hard.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And I think, again, I think this is where, the thing that we constantly keep running into is, what questions are you asking, right? What is it that you want to know? And there is not always necessarily clarity. So I think what's happened is that people have now rushed to wanting to look at data and collect data, but there is not necessarily the layer of, hey, wait a minute, what do we want to know? Right? What are we actually trying to get from this? What in the end are we hoping to learn? Right? What are we going to do once we learn something? So what's happening is, with a lot of the effort right now, is that a lot of interesting insights are surfacing in our schools, but there still isn't necessarily the difference or the differentiation between what's signal and what's noise, right? And you need strategists in our institution, right? You need the strategic thinkers and the strategic leaders in our institution to help you be able to make sense of what's signal and what's noise from all the data that you have and the data that you're collecting, and then know what makes sense and what additional data that you might need to collect.
Yeah. Well, let's bring it back to the no, because I still have a couple of questions that I'm interested in exploring. So, when you're creating strategy, it means you have to make difficult choices, which means you have to say no to certain things. Like how do you recommend that a school actually do that? Like, how do they look at the options and determine, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense? Like, do you have a framework, or is like, what would you do?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there are processes, and frameworks that we, take a school through, take an organization through. I think first and foremost, Peter, it starts with actually how well do you know your culture, and before we really spend time on strategy, what we find is that really, another misconception is that people think that strategy is all about having the vision and the plan, when really strategy is actually first and foremost about your culture, and so what folks need to do more of in our recommendation and in our experience is that spend more time understanding your culture before you develop your strategy. If you really know and understand your culture well, then the strategy will become more clear. The choices, even the difficult ones, will become more clear. And so the problem, again, on the process side, is that we're not spending enough time really looking at culture and understanding culture. We're going as quickly as we can to strategy. The way, at a very high level, kind of the broad summarization that I offer is that it's really about problem finding before problem solving, right? And so when people engage in strategic planning, if you find yourself rushing to problem solving, then you have a problem right there. Because really on the process side, what you need to do first and foremost is find the problem you're trying to solve for, understand the problem you need to solve before you actually start looking for solutions. So how much time are you spending on problem finding before you spend time on problem solving? And we almost recommend that it's at least a 2-to-1 ratio, that you should spend double the time on finding the problem, understanding and identifying the questions you need to answer, compared to the time you actually spend on identifying the solutions.
Oh, that's fascinating. And so when you take that approach and you apply it to really making sure you understand your culture, like what would you recommend?
I mean, there are lots of things, that we kind of walk an institution through. Again, I can't get into the details, of all of
Yeah,
that.
high level though.
Say,
Just high level.
what I would say at a high level, right? Like, start with, a clear definition of culture, right? Like, so for example, one definition that I really like is culture is the temperature, not the forecast, right? And so, like, you have to be able to, like, for example, culture is the temperature. I can look outside my window and I don't care, what I wish the temperature to be. I have to look at what is the temperature, not what I hope it would be, right? And so you have to deal first and foremost, you have to tackle the reality of what's going on the ground at your institution. You have to deal with the warts and you have to deal with the things that are the beautiful things, right? So all of the beauty and the not so beautiful things that are happening in your institution, you have to be able to wrestle with. You have to know exactly what to ask. You have to be able to listen to the diversity of people within your institution, right? But also people outside the institution. And you have to then pull it all together to be able to really look at, okay, if this is what we promise, right? To a large extent, it's, are you really clear about the value proposition, right? And so the value proposition is not just simply what I put on my admissions collateral or on my website or on my social media. The value proposition, I'll give you an example. When I ask people, right, when I ask board members and admin to say, tell me why, your school, why people choose you. And they will say academic excellence, right? They will say, small class sizes, right? And so on and so forth. And I'm like, okay, great. I'm like, let me ask you, is there a school out there in your market right now that's promising academic mediocrity, right? So academic excellence is not enough because that's, I'm sure, a true statement, but how true is it? And what does it actually mean? And for whom are you delivering an academically excellent education, and for whom are you not, right? And small class sizes is a way you might deliver excellence, but it's not the reason people choose it. People choose small class sizes as a symptom or as a detail of what they believe is an excellent education. So your value proposition is not small class sizes. Your value proposition actually is not even academic excellence, right? And so when we talk about culture, what's the temperature, not the forecast? You have to get into the weeds to really know, okay, if this is what we promise, do we know what it means? And for whom are we actually doing a great job? And for whom perhaps are we missing the mark?
I mean, it gets back to where you started, right? You're talking about knowing your competitive advantage.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so, strategy is really what comes at the end. It's not what you do at the beginning of a strategic planning process, right? And that's kind of a little bit of the paradox, is that people think that as soon as you begin the work on developing strategy, you're going to go right in and start to talk strategy, when actually strategy is the outcome. It's not anywhere close to even at the beginning of where you spend your time.
You talked about this earlier. I just want to pull on the thread a little bit more about, like Apple, right? They're not like letting the world know about their iPhone strategy, right? But schools typically they've put out their strategic plans. You can download them on their websites and all the things. What's the balance there for an independent school? I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but can you just go in a little more depth there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, for example, what I would say is that, what you want to think about for what you need to promote out there, right, is, take a marketing approach. Don't call it your strategic plan, right? So if what you really need to be putting out there is, here is why you should choose my school, our community, by all means, right? Like, absolutely think about what are the marketing communication components of your strategy that you want to put out there. So if you know these are the things that are really good, these are the competitive advantages, etc., by all means, go and put those out there to be able to talk about the experience, right? Talk about the impact, right? But what you're not going to do is, hey, here is where we are going 3 years out. Here is where we are going 5 years out. Here are the things that we are experimenting with. Here are the things where we are going to take a risk, right? And so on, because you don't want that to be known out there. Because as soon as you put it out there, people will assume not only are you doing it today, but you're doing it really well today, when actually part of your strategy may be, hey, here are the things we're doing really well, but here are the things where we need to develop some capacity. So we're going to do them, but we're not going to be able to do them as well as we would like. I'll give you a very clear example, right? If a school has an attrition issue, right, from 5th grade to 6th grade, let's just take that as an example, right?
Yeah.
Or from pre-K to kindergarten, right? Whatever the case may be, if you have an attrition issue, right, and you realize that, look, what we do in our elementary school is top-notch. People really love what we do in our elementary. But we are facing an attrition issue because people seem to prefer our competitors when it comes to the middle and upper school rather than staying with us through the middle and upper school programs. Well, you need to have some strategy built in. You need to have a goal and tactics built in to really help you understand the attrition issue and then have a roadmap of what you're going to do about it. Right? But are you going to put that on your website? No way. You're not going to tell people, hey, by the way, we have an issue with our middle school program, so come for our elementary, but hey, you might be thinking about going somewhere else for middle school. Now, does that mean that the parents in your community are not talking about it already? Of course they are, right? Because if it's known to you, it's known to them, clearly, because they're the ones who are going somewhere else. And what are you doing? How long it might take you to do it? You may have identified there are certain programs in particular. There are programs that are good, programs that are not. There may be some issues related to collaboration between the teachers. These are the things that start to get to the heart of strategy. You're not going to put that up on your website. And this is why so many strategic plans look so bare, frankly, and don't really read like strategy, because you're really taking and removing the pieces of strategy that need to be part of your program. And so then what people look up there on the website really just starts to read like a marketing plan as opposed to a strategic plan.
Do you think schools understand that?
No, not really. Because and the only reason I say that, Peter, and again, I'm really generalizing this, right?
Sure.
And the reason I'm generalizing is because the reason I say not really is because of how many plans we continue to see, right, that look like every other plan out there, right? If you are able to just simply remove your school's name and put another school's, would it read like any other school? Right? Your plan needs to be your plan. Your strategy can only be your strategy. That's how you know if it is your strategy, right? If it can read like any other places, then you don't really have a true strategy, right? The other piece, Peter, that I would say is that the reason why I don't think, I think our industry gets it is because of how often we use strategic plans and strategic plan processes in order to change culture. Right? And so if what you're trying to accomplish is change culture through a strategic plan, not going to happen, right? It's not because I'm saying so. It's because Peter Drucker and other people said it a long time ago, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So the other reason when I talk about problem finding and spending time on culture, and really it's at least a 2-to-1 ratio as part of the process, is that you got to know what's applicable, what's going to fit within your DNA, because you can only nurture what's in your nature. You can't nurture what's not in your nature. And yet, too often, we create strategic plans in order to change what's in our nature.
I love it. I mean, it's just a very concise way of kind of setting the stage for independent schools. And, if a school, all right, let's imagine a school watch this or listen to it, and they're like, I need to talk to Nishant. I need some like advice, right? So if they called you intrigued by what you've said here, what you've written in the past, and they're really ready to decouple strategy from plan, like just at a very high level, what is some basic advice that you would offer them?
Yeah, the first thing that I would ask them, let's say I'm talking to a head of school, right? Or a head of school and a board chair. What I would ask them is, how open are you to following the process, right? Are you process oriented? Are you going to remain process driven? Because the needs assessment, the need finding, right? When I talk about problem finding before problem solving, right? How open are you to following the data and the research that we will do? Or do you already have some preconceived notions of where you think this needs to land? If you already have a preconceived outcome in mind of where you think this needs to be or what it needs to say, then what I will say to them is go do it, right? Like, don't waste your time and resources talking to us or anyone else, because it's going to feel performative to the rest of your community. And too often we do go into communities and for other processes, and we find when we talk to the community at large is that they look at whatever strategy the school has and they feel already that this is kind of just a check the box activity that the school did any number of years ago. And so therefore it feels performative. And what you have now is where people are saying, well, look, my opinion was asked for, but it wasn't really heeded. They really did all this, but it wasn't really followed, right? And so what I really ask at its core is, if you already know what you want to do, go do it, right? Just be transparent about it. Talk about why you think you need to do it, and don't call it a strategic plan. Just say, here are the things that we need to address. Here is why we need to address them. This is what we're going to do. If you want to do true strategy, then you have to be willing to be process-oriented and process-driven. And then I will tell them, here is what the process looks like. And it is a lot of, again, culture is the temperature, not the forecast. So we need to be out there taking the temperature, right? The other piece of this is they have to be open to really starting to separate strategy from marketing, right? They have to be willing to separate culture from strategy. And if there is any culture change that they want, then we're going to say that's going to be something that we will need to discuss, because culture change does not really fall under strategy.
Yeah.
You can't use strategy to change culture.
Terrific advice. This episode's just been packed with like just helpful stuff from start to finish. Nishant Mehta from MehtaCognition, thank you so much for sharing today. Hey, and if somebody wants to reach out, like, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, Peter, they can email me directly. They can find us on LinkedIn, MehtaCognition. They can also go to our website, metacognition.com, MEHTACOGNITION. So any number of ways, LinkedIn, email, website available. And of course, I know they can reach out to you and ask for my contact info, and you will reach out to us or connect us, as I know I would be more than happy to do the same for you.
Happily. Yeah. Consider it done. All right, my friend. Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Peter.